Today, I'm going to show a 2003 horror, mystery, thriller film called Gothica. In Woodward Penitentiary, psychiatrist, Dr. Miranda Gray, is interviewing her patient, Chloe Sava. Chloe tells her about the devil who visits her in her cell almost every night and rapes her. Miranda dismisses this as delusions, a way for Chloe's brain to repress the abusive memories she has of her stepfather. This angers Chloe and she lashes out at Miranda, prompting the nurses to take her away. Miranda isn't fazed and returns to Dr. Doug Gray's office, her colleague, and husband. They share a passionate kiss until they're interrupted by another colleague, Dr. Pete Graham. Doug leaves for the day while Miranda works overtime. Her workday ends with a stormy night as Pete accompanies her to her car. She takes her usual route home but is forced to take a detour because of a sinkhole. She turns left and crosses a small white bridge. Miranda suddenly spots a girl in the middle of the road, causing her to crash her car. She's unharmed and approaches the girl in the pouring rain, offering to help her. The girl only looks at her and then she grips her face. Miranda screams as the girl erupts into flames before she passes out. When Miranda wakes up, she's in an observation cell in the same penitentiary she worked at. Feeling disoriented and having no memory of last night, Miranda goes wild, thrashing her room until the nurses manage to sedate her and call Dr. Graham. Pete then reveals to her that she's been in the cell for 3 days and asks her about the last thing she remembers. Miranda recalls her last night to Pete and tells him about the girl she saw. He tells her that it's impossible because there was no girl at the scene, and then he slowly reveals to her that her husband, Doug, is dead and Miranda has been accused of his murder. She breaks down and Pete pins her down on the bed while the nurses try to sedate her again. The next morning, Miranda finds herself in the penitentiary's cafeteria, surrounded by her former patients. Chloe taunts her by tossing a newspaper clipping to Miranda. She opens it up and gasps at the front page article confirming her worst fears. Later that night, she wakes up and hears someone breathe onto her cell's glass door. She jumps back as the words, "Not alone," appear on the misty glass. Unable to accept her new reality, she huddles into a corner and concludes that she must be dreaming. When Miranda opens her eyes, it's already morning. She's directed to the showers where she bathes with 20 other women. She then hears Chloe taunting her. She turns around and sees the girl she saw on the road. Miranda is terrified but the girl catches up to her and digs her nails into her arm. The other patients, frightened at her erratic behavior, run away, leaving her bloody and alone on the tiled floor. At the infirmary, Pete still thinks of her to be deluded and checks her vitals. Trying to make sense of things, Miranda gets Pete to admit his true romantic feelings for her, but he insists that he's just trying to help her. Miranda tries reaching out to another colleague, Dr. Phil Parsons, but he's reluctant to help her. Miranda is then taken to her lawyer, Teddy Howard. Teddy informs her that the evidence is so overwhelming that they have no choice but to plead for temporary insanity. Sheriff Bob Ryan, Doug's best friend, joins their meeting but quickly loses his temper. He accuses Miranda and flashes the gruesome crime scene pictures in front of her. She trembles and notices that her cuts are bleeding again. She takes off the bandage and sees the words, "Not alone," etched into her skin. Her eyes then go down towards the photos and see the same words, painted in blood on their bedroom door. Miranda has another breakdown and is quickly sedated by the medical staff. Pete takes her the next morning to see Dr. Parsons. Miranda tells the 2 doctors that she was there when Doug was killed but insists that she wasn't alone. As she tries to convince them, she spots a framed picture behind Dr. Parsons. Miranda is shocked as she tells them that this was the girl she saw that night. Dr. Parsons looks sad as he tells Miranda that it's impossible because the girl in the picture was his daughter, Rachel, who committed suicide 4 years ago. As the night comes, Miranda wakes up to the strong presence in her cell again. She calls out to the spirit and says that if it is indeed the ghost of Rachel Parsons, then it would let her out of the cell. Her cell door opens and she escapes to the hallway where she sees the figure of a ghostly girl walking through the wall. Miranda breaks into Pete's office where his computer suddenly turns on to reveal a webpage article of Rachel Parsons. A surveillance cam then appears on the screen showing the girl standing in the hallway of the solitary confinement section. Thinking that Chloe is in danger, Miranda runs to her. She arrives in solitary and hears a thump from Chloe's cell. As she looks into the opening, Chloe's bloody face is pushed against the glass. She tries to open the door but is stopped by a man with a tattooed chest of the anima sola. She runs away and is tackled down by the medical staff. Miranda meets Pete the next day and asks about Chloe. She tells him about the man with the tattoo and insists that Rachel didn't commit suicide. Pete dismisses her again as delusional and warns her that if she acts up again, he'll be forced to throw her into solitary. Miranda finds Chloe later in the day in the yard. She apologizes to her for not believing her stories earlier. Chloe accepts her apology and gives her a hug, but is still unable to name the culprit. She then warns Miranda that the devil is targeting her next. At the psych ward, Miranda feels the haunting presence again. As she turns around in her cell, the ghost's rotting face appears before her and smashes her into the wall. Miranda frantically searches for her attacker, but there's no escape. The ghost throws her against the other wall, breaking the furniture. It tosses her back and forth against the two walls and then drops her down to the ground, just in time for the authorities to arrive. As the officer checks on Miranda, she gets up and knocks him unconscious. She grabs the keys and escapes from the ward. The alarm blares and alerts the officers to search for their missing patient. Miranda makes her way to an unused wing of the hospital and slips into the pool and waits for the officers to leave. When she opens her eyes, the ghost appears before her. She screams and runs away, finding herself under the desk of one of her officer friends, Joe. Joe helps her escape by giving her his car keys. Miranda takes off quickly in his car and is shocked as she catches a glimpse of the ghost in her rearview mirror. She's driving too fast and sees the approaching truck at the intersection, but when she steps on the brakes, it doesn't budge. Terror rises up to Miranda's throat as she slams her foot on the brakes. Her car narrowly misses the truck and she lets out a deranged laugh. She crashes through the road signs and stops just before she falls into the sinkhole. In a fit of anger, she yells at the backseat, demanding the ghost what it wants from her. The radio turns on, giving her a hint. Miranda arrives at the home she once shared with her husband just as the porch lights turn on. As she surveys the house, she sees the dried bloodstains on the carpet. The memories come rushing back to her as she remembers carrying a bloody axe and towering over her cowering husband. But the memories don't feel like they belong to her. It felt like she was possessed. She reaches the bathroom and looks at the mirror. She watches as her own face contorts into an unrecognizable figure and realizes that the one who killed her husband was not her, but the vengeful ghost of Rachel Parsons. Miranda sobs in their bedroom, cradling the picture she has of Doug. The ghost gives her another sign, telling her to go to Willow Creek. As dawn breaks, Miranda arrives at their country house. She inspects the house, but it's empty. She enters the barn as well, but only finds broken and rusty farming equipment. As she's about to leave, a glimpse of a video camera box catches her attention. She then spots a secret entrance to the basement. Downstairs, Miranda turns on the lights, gasping in horror as she sees the bed, chains, boxes of drugs, and video equipment. She plays back one of the tapes and is petrified at her husband's secret. It turns out that Doug was living a double life, kidnapping, torturing, raping, and killing women. She hears footsteps upstairs and is about to escape when a police officer catches her. Another woman emerges from the depths of the basement, grabbing Miranda with her bloody hands. The woman turns out to be Doug's latest victim, Tracy Severs. Miranda is then brought in for questioning. She gets a chance to talk to Dr. Parsons and tells him about her experiences with Rachel, concluding that Rachel must have been one of Doug's victims. She tries to relate the same theory with Pete, but he dismisses her yet again. As she spends the night in her cell, she demands to talk to Sheriff Ryan, but he is unavailable. Meanwhile, Pete digs up his own research about the anima sola tattoo. Later that same night, Sheriff Ryan visits Miranda in her cell. Miranda tells him that the meaning of the phrase, "not alone," means that there are two killers and not just Doug. She shares her theory and comes up with a psychological profile of the second killer. As she speaks out the facts, she realizes that the profile perfectly matches Sheriff Ryan. She then concludes that the only reason he was so willing to talk to her was because he was trying to cover up his own tracks. Sheriff Ryan realizes that Miranda is onto him and smashes her against the wall. She rips his shirt open, revealing the anima sola tattoo on his chest, confirming that he was the man she saw in Chloe's cell. Miranda manages to escape his grasp and climbs up the stairs. He fires consecutive shots at her, one bullet hitting open the gas pipe. She reaches the locked doors and screams for help, but he catches up to her. She hides under one of the desks as he gets his shotgun. He's left at the end of his line and starts his deranged monologue, revealing the decades-old killing secrets he shared with Doug and admitting the fact that they killed Rachel Parsons. As he's about to flip over Miranda's desk, a shadow catches his sight from the other side. He shoots and follows it. He sees a woman standing in front of him behind the glass, believing it to be Miranda, but it's actually Rachel. He fires another bullet, breaking the glass, and is shocked to see Rachel's corpse. Terrified, he fires another shot at her, igniting the gas surrounding him. He's pushed back by the explosion and is engulfed in flames. As he turns around to face Miranda, she aims a gun at him and takes the final shot. She runs to the door just in time to meet Pete, who looks relieved to see her alive and apologizes to her for not believing her before. A year passes and Miranda's charges are dropped. She's walking the city streets with Chloe, who has also been released, and they have become good friends. She helps her hail a taxi and they bid each other goodbye. Miranda walks the streets alone and sees a boy in the middle of the street. She reaches out to him as he's about to be hit by a vehicle, but the apparition disappears. Miranda continues her walk, and on the side, a poster is plastered on a lamppost, looking for a little boy.